Cool. So, Minister, the Honourable Anne Twilley.
Mr Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about Budget 16, the part of the appropriations debate, because in social development we've made two significant changes in this, which are reflected in this budget. And the first one, of course, is that this government is committed to making a significant change to the way that we look after children and young people in care. And just to remind the House, that we spent last year with an expert advisory panel really lifting up every stone and having a look at the way that the system works as we look after young people and children in care. I set up a group of young people who had actually been in care, some of whom were still in care, to advise that process, and of course a myriad of people throughout the country, practitioners, social workers, health workers, and a wide range of NGOs were consulted. During that process, we found that we have a system that is actually broken, a system that, despite the best efforts of some highly motivated, highly professional staff, a system that is not delivering to the children who probably need help the most in our communities. What we found was that, if you looked, they took a particular cohort of young people who were born in the 12 months between June 1990 and 1991 to look at what had happened to them in their lives as they had gone through the state care system. And at age 21, almost 90% of them were reliant on a benefit. 90% of those young people were reliant on a benefit, and about 25% of them ended up on a benefit with a child. Almost 80% of them did not have that minimum qualification of NCA level 2, so they didn't get a good educational start to give them the opportunities to live good lives. More than 30% of them had a youth justice referral by the time they were 18, and almost 20% had a custodial sentence, and almost 40% had a community sentence. These are the most vulnerable children who, through no fault of their own, have ended up not in families that love, support and care for them. And they have relied on the state then to step in, keep them safe and make their lives better. And what the EAP report showed, and those stats show, is that the state failed those children. So this government is determined to make a difference to that. It's governments of different colours have to take responsibility, but this government has stepped up. So the first thing we did in this budget was actually make sure that we were giving financial stability to the existing child, youth and family. Over the past few years, it's had some one-off funding. As we've been reviewing, we've had the process around the green paper and the white paper, and there was one-off funding given to SIF whilst that process was happening. That couldn't continue because actually we had more children in care who were staying in care for longer, and that costs more. So the first thing we had to do was stabilise that funding for SIF, and we did that with $145 million gone in to stabilise SIF over the next few years. Because the risk is, of course, while you're redesigning a system, that the existing system flounders a little and that gaps open up and children fall through it. So we were absolutely determined to make sure that that existing SIF was well financially supported whilst we designed that new system. So $145 million has gone in to meet those cost pressures and that increased demand, and also the changes that the Vulnerable Children's that came into force as a result of the Vulnerable Children's Act on the 1st of July this year. And then, because we are designing a new system and that has costs, and we need to make provision for the design of the system, and we want the new operating system up and running from the 1st of April next year, there's almost $200 million in this budget to make that happen and support that new entity. Now, I have to say that I'm absolutely indebted to my Cabinet colleagues and caucus colleagues for their huge support of this change, because this government is determined, and I know that there's support right around the House for us to get this right. It's absolutely critical for these children and young people that we get this system right. We've had 14 different restructures over the years, but this time, if we all work together, we are determined to make that happen, and this budget set the scene. It's not the end game. There will be more costs, and I will be back in budget 2017. I've made that very clear, but this was a good start. Mr. Chair, I think the second most important part of this budget for 2016 was the way that we have then focused in on supporting more and more New Zealanders into work. In the latest valuation, and remember we have an actuarial valuation that's done every year, it's reported publicly, anyone can access it on the ministry website. Some of the opposition members seem to not be able to find it, or if they can't be bothered digging into it to find out, but it's all there, all the assumptions that are made, how it's all worked, so that people can understand what it is that this government is doing using the investment approach. That is, we use that information to determine where best to put the priority for our resources. Who are the group of people that need support to get into work the most, and how do we go about doing that? And what we've seen as a result of that is a reduction in that long-term liability, which isn't our liability. It's the liability of New Zealanders whose dreams and hopes and lives are crushed by living in endless poverty of relying on a benefit. We know that the best thing for them and their families, not only financially but emotionally and socially, is getting into work. And so budget 16, we've seen that reduction in that of 12 billion of that liability over 4 years. And that means, and as a consequence of that, we saw the number of people reliant on a benefit fall below 280,000 for the first time since 2008, the global financial crisis. And I see my colleague Nikki Wagner sitting here in the House, and I want to pay tribute to her because she led a project in Christchurch which was focused on helping those people with a disability that we know are reliant on a benefit. They're put on a supported living benefit because they have a disability that means they are not expected to work. But we know that so many of them want to work. They want to work because they know it's better for them, it's better for their families. And so my colleague Nikki Wagner led that project, which saw 600 people. We set a goal of 300, and we thought that that was ambitious, but it was 600 people went into employment as a result of that. And that was a result of working with employers, talking to them about how they could support people with a disability into work. And I think that's a glowing example for the rest of New Zealand. And I know that project is now going out further. We're going to try it in the Bay of Plenty with a different group of employers. And it's about showing employers that these are people that can be some of their best workers. The research is very clear. They take fewer sick days. They are much more loyal, and they can be much more productive. And so it's really important. We got 61.2 million in the budget 16 to extend the youth service to include 18 and 19-year-olds, and 26 million to maintain and increase that intensive case management that we know is so successful in helping people and supporting them into work and then keeping them in work. And we are now starting to do quite a lot more work on how we can support them for longer in their jobs to make sure that they've got all the childcare support that's necessary, that the employers are comfortable to ask for help with people who have a disability or who might have mental health issues before they're disengaged from work. So it's how do we keep people in work through those difficult times, some of that being the first 4 or 5 months of work. And then 2 very small projects that are very exciting, one working with prisoners getting out of prison and one working in hand with the health sector on addressing the issue of mental health, which is such a growing problem. Terrific budget, I think, for changing the lives of thousands of New Zealanders.
Call Sir William Seal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, earlier today during question time, I suspect that